Hi everybody and welcome to Mark Overanalyzes Film. Today I will be looking at 1940's His Girl Friday. Before I begin, allow me to remind you that I am available for story coaching and reading at markoveranalyzesstory.com. The screenplay for His Girl Friday was written by Charles Lederer, adapted from the stage play The Front Page, which was written by the genius Ben Hecht and Charles MacArthur. It was also directed by the legendary Howard Hawks, and into the bargain, it starred Cary Grant and Rosalind Russell. So it's safe to say we're in good hands here. Now, I decided to do His Girl Friday since I thought this season has been a little bit light on female protagonists so far, and Hildy Johnson is one of my all-time favorite protagonists, full stop. But also, His Girl Friday is a screwball romantic comedy, which is arguably my favorite genre, maybe? And that's at least partly because I love a good rom-com, and there are so few really good modern rom-coms. Most people would still default to When Harry Met Sally as an example, I think, and that was, at this point, 34 years ago. To put that in context, that would be the equivalent of someone in 1989, the year of that film's release, giving a film from 1955 as an example of a good film from the genre. And no offense to Gentlemen Prefer Brunettes, but it feels like the genre should have produced more in the meantime. But in the 30s and 40s, we had It Happened One Night, The Philadelphia Story, Bringing Up Baby, The Shop Around the Corner, The Lady Eve, such a good movie, You Can't Take It With You, My Man Godfrey, Woman of the Year, A Matter of Life and Death. The list goes on and on and on. So why is that? Why were rom-coms so good back then? And what is it about His Girl Friday that makes it still, in my view, so much better than 95% of the rom-coms that followed in its wake? Well, with all that in mind, first I'll look at the fundamental features of the protagonist, and then I'll go through the main story beats by looking at the sequences of the film. Then I'll talk about the main things I learned along the way. So, let's begin with the 5 questions about the protagonist. Question 1. Whose story is it? Like so many people to this day, Hildy Johnson decides around the age of 30 that the media is a cutthroat business bleeding her dry, so she's decided to leave it for pastures quieter. Now, all she has to do is tell her old boss and ex-husband that she's marrying another man, so that should be straightforward enough. Question 2. What is their life dream? Life dream here refers to what it is that the protagonist wants or is aiming to do when the film begins and the story has yet to properly start. His Girl Friday is 91 minutes long and it is packed tight. So Hildy's life dream is explained to us right out the gate. She's getting married, moving to Albany, and leaving the newspaper business far behind her. Question 3. What is their want? Want here is what the protagonist is trying to achieve in Act 2 of the film, from the moment they really begin their journey until the moment they are at their most defeated. The whole point of this is really to give the character something to do and to give shape to the story. As such, the want is a SMART goal, in that it is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and usually time-bound. Now, it's not always like this, but it tends to work really well when the want and the life dream are really in tension with each other. And so it is here. Hildy wants to get out of the game, but at minute 23, her old boss Walter manages to bribe her into covering one last story for the paper in exchange for taking out an expensive insurance policy with her fiancé Bruce. It's a classic one last job setup. Question 4. What is her need? Need is the human quality or piece of wisdom that the character lacks at the beginning of the story. And whatever about the life dream and the want being in tension, the life dream and the need being in tension is a classic character setup. The protagonist believes one thing at the beginning of the story and comes to believe something else entirely at the end. Hildy's need, then, is to realize that she is, in her own words, a newspaper man through and through. Hers is not a life to be lived in Albany. Question 5. Does she get what she wants and or what she needs? There's a great line in the movie Moonstruck where Nicolas Cage's character tells Shares, "I'm a wolf, you run to the wolf in me, that don't make you no lamb." What makes His Girl Friday so rewarding at the end is that it holds and holds and holds on the final reveal until right at the end when we discover just to what extent Hildy is right where she actually wants to be, and she has indeed gotten what she wants and embraced what she needs. But we'll get to that. Okay, so now that I've attempted to answer the 5 key questions, let's have a look at His Girl Friday's sequences. There are normally, but not always, 8 sequences or stages in a film. A sequence is a combination of scenes that are tied together by having a single overriding dramatic question or tension, and they tend to be between 10 and 15 minutes in length. A good way to think about it is that every 10 to 15 minutes, the audience should be on some level asking themselves a different central dramatic question. So, Act 1 has our first 2 sequences, and the first one is always pretty much life as it is. So, straight off the bat, we see Hildy and Bruce march into the office, and we learn that Hildy is to tell her ex-husband and former boss, Walter Burns, that she's getting married tomorrow. But no sooner has she arrived in Walter's office than we have, in minute 2, His Girl Friday's inciting incident, or the event without which our story as it is would not happen. Walter learns that the governor has not signed a reprieve for someone called Earl Williams, and Walter is most displeased. And again, I love just about everything Walter does here, from suggesting that the idea that divorce is for life is old-fashioned, to proposing that if they can't work together anymore, they can always just get married again. But Hildy isn't biting, so he pretends that Sweeney is suddenly unavailable and tries to incite Hildy to cover the story. So eventually, in order to stop him, Hildy has to break the news. She's not only getting married, she's getting married tomorrow. And for the first time in what we imagine must be a long time, Walter is lost for words. But he's never down for long, so he discovers that Bruce is outside, and before you know it, he's bringing the couple out for lunch. We now have our first real tension as we wonder, can Walter find a way to keep Hildy in his orbit for a bit? And so at minute 14, we enter sequence 2. Now, His Girl Friday is clearly adapted from a play, so we can see here that many of the sequences are actually just one long scene, or at least dominated by one. And so it is here, as this entire sequence is one scene in a restaurant. Walter attempts to convince Hildy that Sweeney has just had twins, and that if she doesn't cover the story for him, she'll have Earl Williams's blood on her hands. And then Hildy recalls that Sweeney only got married 4 months ago. Quickly changing tack, Walter then offers to bribe the new couple. He'll take out a huge insurance policy with Bruce if Hildy will write the story. Of course, because Bruce is the total opposite of Walter, he would never use Hildy for financial gain. But Hildy is all about the idea of helping her betrothed. Now, it might be worth stopping for a second to point out just what a classic textbook example of personifying an argument His Girl Friday is. We have Walter, who represents Hildy's need, and Bruce, who represents her original life dream and, debatably her kind of flaw, her lack of faith in her need. To paraphrase Maverick in Top Gun, a journalist isn't what Hildy is, it's who she is. But at this point, she hasn't embraced that, and she feels the siren call of a different kind of life. Her relationship with these 2 men will show her relationship to this argument within herself. It is simple, but there's nothing harder than doing the simple stuff well. Anyways, she's just about to engage on the adventure that will show this. At minute 23, Hildy decides to cover the Earl Williams story in exchange for the insurance policy.
Start all over again. Now, I'll offer you 2 a business proposition.
We're not interested.
Well, you'll be interested. Now, you're a smart
Don't
young
listen
man.
to him, Bruce. I know him of old. From way back, and he never makes
I'm
that.
talking to him. Now, look, Bruce. You persuade Hildy to do the story, and you can write out a nice, fat insurance policy for me. What do you say to that?
No,
Come on, Bruce.
No, I wouldn't use my wife for business purposes.
Wait a minute, Bruce. Walter, how big a policy?
Oh, 25,000,
What?
50,000.
What's the commission on a $100,000 policy?
Around $1,000, but
Well,
Hildy...
what's wrong with $1,000?
Well, I couldn't
We could
permit-
use that money, Bruce.
We have our big question now, will Hildy be able to cover the story and still escape? And so, at that, we end Act 1 and we enter Act 2. Act 2 begins with Sequence 3, the first attempts to solve the problem. Now, Sequence 3 always begins with a what's the plan scene, so that the audience knows what they can expect from the long Act 2 that's about to unfold. And so, Hildy immediately arrives in the press room of the criminal courts building, which is full of other journalists, and is overshadowed by the gallows just outside the window. This is what our second act is all about. At the same time, we see the Walter and Bruce subplot set up. Bruce is clearly out of his element as Walter gets his medical and sets Bruce up for getting pickpocketed. But most importantly, Sequence 3 always has this dynamic where the protagonist refuses the call to their need during the sequence before eventually accepting the call at the end of the sequence. And so the first thing that Hildy does is insist to the other journalist that she's getting married tomorrow and leaving all of this behind. Then, when an alarm goes off, she can't help but get fired up, but then immediately tries to downplay her own reaction. But then, 6 minutes later, Hildy accepts the call, or you could also say she makes her first unconscious move towards her need. At minute 32, Hildy interviews Earl Williams, and there can be no doubt that this is what she's born to do.
Could it have been production for use?
I don't know.
What's a gun for, Earl?
A gun?
Hmm.
Why, to shoot, of course.
Oh, and maybe that's why you used it.
Maybe.
Seems reasonable.
Yes, it is. But you see, I've never had a gun in my hand before. And that's what a gun's for, isn't it? Maybe that's why.
Sure it is.
Yes, that's what I thought of. Production for use. Why, it's simple, isn't it?
Very simple.
There's nothing crazy about that, is there?
Now, the tension of this sequence was really something like, will Hildy find out what the story is? And in interviewing Earl Williams, she has, or at least she's found or invented, an angle for it. So we have a new tension now. Will Hildy write the story? Therefore, at minute 34, we enter sequence 4, the greater attempts to solve the problem. And goddamn, this is a great sequence. Sequence 4 ups the ante across the board, but what is so great about His Girl Friday's fourth sequence is that it presents in full throat both the arguments for and against Hildy's need. Lots of people struggle to warm to His Girl Friday because they argue it kind of celebrates a lot of dodgy stuff, some real dodgy behavior, and frankly, Hildy and Walter might be terrible people. Walter almost certainly is a terrible person. But His Girl Friday does not attempt to sugarcoat the media or hide the negatives of the choice that Hildy makes. Whether or not Hildy's eventual choice is a good one or a bad one, it's the one that Hildy herself needs to make. That's what makes her a great character. That's what's genuinely exciting about the story. And so sequence 4 begins with a real counter-argument. The other journalists are frankly pathetic. They're sitting around playing cards waiting for a man to die. Their dreams extend so far as having a buxom blonde for a secretary. Far worse, when a troubled, emotional young woman, Molly, walks in, all they do is mock her, almost inhumanly, for having the nerve to feel some kind of anything for the victim. Eventually, Hildy leads Molly out of the room. When Molly says the others aren't human, she responds that she knows they're newspaper men. But then we see what's really going on. When Hildy and Molly leave the room goes quiet, and the men stop playing cards. These desensitized men are ashamed of themselves. Once Hildy returns, she gets a call to learn that Bruce has been arrested for apparently pickpocketing. She picks him up and insists that he stay in a taxicab downstairs for 3 minutes while she finishes her job. She is so close to being out, but of course, we are now approaching our midpoint, so the protagonist has actually been experimenting with her need. While watching these other newshounds use and abuse a young woman, Hildy not only sees the need for herself in this role, but she's also been writing one hell of a story. So she comes back full of piss and vinegar, calls Walter and tells him that their deal is done. She tears up her own story, and so we apparently have an answer to our sequence tension. But right as she's about to leave, the incredibly self-involved and corrupt officials running the joint allow Earl Williams to escape. The alarm goes up and, well, Hildy Johnson just can't resist.
Hello. Hurry up. This is important.
Give me the desk.
Flash, Earl Williams just escaped.
Yeah, right. Don't know yet.
Call you back.
Williams took the powder.
Went over the wall.
I don't know anything yet.
Call you back.
Oh, Post, get me Walter Burns, quick. Hildy Johnson. Walter, Hildy. Oh, William just escaped from the county jail. Yeah. Don't worry, I'm on the job.
At minute 46 into a 91-minute runtime, almost exactly halfway, we have His Girl Friday's midpoint. Hildy has gone chasing the story and left Bruce to wait on her downstairs. Hildy has now made her first conscious move towards her need, and so we enter sequence 5, the honeymoon sequence. The honeymoon sequence is so called because the protagonist has just acted in accordance with her need, and so, generally, things start to go well for her. And so it is here. Hildy gets a massive scoop that the idiotic, vain, corrupt sheriff was the one who gave Earl the gun that he shot his way out with. But again, we have a short-term tension to keep Hildy here. In order to get the story, she had to spend Bruce's money. So now, in the honeymoon sequence, we're wondering, will Hildy get the money from Walter? Of course, while she's doing so, in a foreshadowing of the climactic action, she encounters the mayor. And the mayor is the personification of the corrupt, dealing kind of official that the Fourth Estate is there to out. She also learns that Bruce has been arrested again through Walter's nefarious means. But this time, she can't come down immediately because she's waiting on Bruce's money that she spent from Walter. And while things are going well, the mayor and the sheriff are caught in a further bind. Process server Pettibone, who met his wife 19 years ago, arrives with a reprieve for Earl Williams from the governor. This is a real mess for the mayor and the sheriff, so they decide to pretend it never happened and send Pettibone away with a nice new job in the city, which doesn't seem like the most airtight plan. But things have been going well for quite a while now, so it's time for the honeymoon sequence to come to an end. Walter's henchman Louis arrives with the new counterfeit money that Hildy owes Bruce, and so the sequence tension has been answered. Kinda, at least. It is counterfeit. And so, Hildy is about to make a call and finally escape. Fortunately or unfortunately for Hildy though, Earl Williams comes through the window with a gun that very moment. We ask, will Hildy be able to hand Earl over to the newspaper? And so we enter sequence 6 now, the bridge from the honeymoon to the low point. Now, we're racing to a climax at the end of Act 2, so we can see that the pressure is building on all sides for Hildy. She needs to protect Earl within the press room, but also needs to get the story, but also needs to keep Bruce on side. And so we can see how torn she is as she talks to both men in her life at the same time over the phone. Now, I don't know if this is a coincidence, but I'm inclined to think probably not, considering the rest of the film. There's a rule of thumb that when things are going well for the protagonist, they are moving from left to right on the screen, and vice versa. Here, Hildy has 2 phones, Walter on the right and Bruce on the left. Also, I have to point this out somewhere because it's such a standout feature of this film. Hildy can carry on 2 conversations at once because, 1, she's brilliant, but also 2, His Girl Friday broke the record for fastest dialogue in a film at 240 words per minute, almost 100 words more per minute than the average. It's pretty remarkable to see in action.
Maybe you think I could. Get me Walter Burns, quick. Tell him I need him. Hello. Oh, but Bruce, please. I know I said I'd be down 20 minutes, but something terrific has happened. Hold on. Walter, Hildy, come over here right away. Wait, Bruce, just a second. I'll explain everything. Walter, get this. I've got Earl Williams here. Yeah, right in the press room. Honest, on the level. Hurry, I need you. Right. Bruce, the biggest thing in the world has happened. I've captured Earl Williams. You know, the murderer. Stay down there, Earl. Wait a minute. Listen, Bruce, I'll be down, but as soon as I hand him over the paper, I'll be right down. And Bruce, I can't.
Anyways, if Hildy weren't under enough pressure, Molly then enters and discovers that Earl is there, and she is soon followed by the other journalists. Hildy hides Earl in a roll-top desk. Now, there's a lot of pressure on Hildy to be a journalist right now, and Bruce is in prison. So it is at this juncture that his girl Friday introduces Mrs. Baldwin, Hildy's soon-to-be mother-in-law, to balance things out a bit. Hildy is now confronted with what she's been doing this whole time, and her mother-in-law gives the game away. Now, his girl Friday has a few genuinely shocking moments in amongst the comedy, but perhaps none more so than this. A desperate Molly, bullied by newspapermen, throws herself out the window in order to distract the jackal-like journalists. As they chase after her, Walter arrives. And there's an argument to be made that the moment that he does, we enter Act 3. But I'm inclined to think it's a little bit later. Either way, it doesn't really matter as the overall shape of the story and the thematic argument remains clear. Anyways, Walter has Mrs. Baldwin escorted out of the room and gets busy scheming. It's pretty clear he is in the ascendancy now, but Hildy isn't quite ready to accept it. She laments what Walter has done to her until Walter spins her a yarn. Right at the end of Act 2, Walter tells Hildy this isn't just a story, it's a revolution. It's not just a newspaper story, it is, crucially, a career. And Hildy, once again, cannot resist. She gets to work and the two are really flying. But then, Bruce enters, having been bailed out by Albany and wondering where his mother has gone, and rightfully being pretty annoyed that Hildy has been working rather than, bailing him out of prison for a crime he didn't commit. Again, there are such strong arguments both for and against what Hildy is doing here, and so Act 2 ends as it so often does. The protagonist no longer believes the counter-argument, but the argument seems impossible. In a haze of the rush of the scoop, Hildy goes into an almost trance-like state and pays little heed to Bruce and his imploring to come with him. As he walks out the door, he offers a kind of ultimatum. Hildy, only half paying attention, responds more to herself than anyone.
Well, that's what I am.
What? No, leave the rooster story alone. That's human interest. Did you get hold of Butcher
Look, if you
County
had any
yet?
sympathy or understanding,
Well,
you'd
get hold
understand
of
what
it.
I'm
I
trying to
understand,
do.
all right. I
Wait,
understand.
just a minute. There's only one question I want to know.
What?
Walter.
What?
The mayor's first wife. What was her name?
You mean the one with the wart on her?
Right.
Fanny. What did you say, Duffy?
Hildy, I don't think you ever loved me at all.
Oh, never mind that. You're not working for the advertising
Remember, if you
department.
change your mind, I'm leaving on the 9 o'clock train.
Hold on, Duffy, hold on.
I am, instead of trying to change me into something else. I'm no suburban bridge player. I'm a newspaper man.
Hildy no longer believes that she can be a suburban housewife, but nor has she consciously given up on Bruce. She no longer believes the counter-argument, but the argument seems impossible. And so, at minute 71, with a jam-packed 20 minutes left, we end Act 2, and we enter Act 3. Act 3 contains the false resolution and the true resolution, and so when Hildy sees Walter work poor Benzinger, the terrible poet, out of his own job, she recalls what a double-crossing snake he is, and then she snaps out of her fugue writing state and recalls what Bruce actually said. He's not coming back, he's getting the 9 o'clock train. And if that wasn't bad enough, Louis comes back all banged up and reveals that he's been in a car accident with some policemen, and he reckons that Bruce's mother might just have died in the same car accident. This is the lowest of the low. Hildy has recalled what a two-faced liar Walter is, and now feels responsible for the death of Bruce's mother. So, while Walter is still trying to figure out a way to remove the roll-top desk, Hildy starts calling around the hospitals looking for Mrs. Baldwin. Eventually, when neither have any luck, Hildy decides to leave. It really looks like she's walking out that door and this might be it. And so, at minute 78, with 13 minutes left, we enter His Girl Friday's true resolution. Hildy opens the door only to be rushed by all the other journalists and the sheriff. They know something's up and they refuse to let her go. Things are looking tight, and then Mrs. Baldwin turns up, looking rather worse for wear, and reveals that Walter had her kidnapped and that they've been harboring a fugitive. And Walter, moving so fast that even he can't keep up anymore, accidentally gives the game away. And there's a small but important moment here, I think. The cops take out their guns and train them on the roll-top desk containing Earl Williams, about to shoot an unarmed man, and Mrs. Baldwin runs off in a tizzy. Say what you want about Hildy and her choices, but she's got guts. She's not going to turn away from this. Of course, this is immediately counterbalanced by the fact that every single journalist immediately lies about what is happening. They then go chasing Mrs. Baldwin for the story, leaving Walter and Hildy with the sheriff and the mayor. They are to be arrested, and it's looking like 10 years apiece. But then, of course, as foreshadowed in our honeymoon sequence, Mr. Pettibone comes shambling in, having spoken to his wife, don't you know, and reveals that Earl Williams has been pardoned, and that the mayor and the sheriff tried to bribe him. And suddenly, the shoe is very much on the other foot. Everyone leaves, and with 4 minutes left, we've got one question left. Our first question, our main question. Is Hildy going to escape? And ingeniously, Hildy now clearly wants to stay, but Walter, who has been trying so hard to make her stay all this time, is now sending her away. He's telling her all the right stuff. This is a bad business. She'd be better off out of it. Bruce can give her all the things that he can't. Crestfallen, Hildy once again starts to walk out that door, only to be called back once again by a phone call. It turns out that Bruce has been arrested for a third time. This time for having counterfeit cash, which Hildy gave him, which Hildy had because Walter gave it to her, which he had the opportunity to do because Hildy spent Bruce's original money on getting a story from the warden. At that, Hildy breaks down crying, and Walter appears to be actually sorry now, or at least concerned, that it appears he's actually hurt her. And then, one of the all-time great last-minute twists. Hildy admits that she's not crying because of Bruce, she's crying because she thought Walter was actually letting her go.
What's the matter with you? You never cried before. Hildy.
I thought you were really sending me away with Bruce. I didn't know you had him locked up. I thought you were on the level for once. I thought you were just standing by and letting me go off with him and not doing a thing about it.
Oh, come on, honey. What do you think I was, a chump?
And I thought you didn't love me.
Oh, what were you thinking, Wiz?
I don't know.
At that, she says they have to go down, get Bruce out of prison, and pack him off to Albany, where he belongs. Walter gets on the phone to Duffy and declares that Hildy is rejoining the paper, that they're getting married again, and this time they're definitely going to have an actual honeymoon. 2 whole weeks in Nugget. What's that? There's been a strike? In Albany? God, I love this movie, which is not surprising considering I follow a pretty strict policy of one for me and one for me on this podcast. But I do wish everyone in Hollywood would watch His Girl Friday and really genuinely think about it. It is 91 minutes long and absolutely packed with story, jokes, and memorable characters. The majority of the film takes place in one room and it is never boring. And it's hilarious and compelling, not because we like Hildy and Walter, but because we love them. So, this is arguably my favorite rom-com, and I was wondering why so many of my favorites are in this particular time period and of this particular genre. And I think I have an idea why. His Girl Friday is a perfect example of a subgenre of the 30s and 40s called comedies of remarriage. The genre was a successful attempt to evade censorship, wherein the protagonists could divorce and flirt with and kiss strangers, but then end up back together, thus reinforcing the idea of family and commitment. But, as is so often the case, the limitations imposed created some of the best art. Perhaps the ultimate example of the comedy of remarriage genre is The Philadelphia Story, another film that I absolutely adore. But the genre also produced It Happened One Night, The Awful Truth, The Lady Eve, and loads of the other classics that I mentioned earlier. And again, I think I have an idea why. Or at least I have a theory. Well, kind of 2 theories. First of all, when I covered my favorite modern rom-com, When Harry Met Sally, I quoted the writer and producer Steve Kaplan, who said the bad rom-coms are about how 2 people can get together, while good rom-coms are about how 2 people can stay together. If you start your story with 2 people who have been divorced, You can't mess around with lazy misunderstandings. These people have not only been married, they've been divorced. They know every bad facet of each other. And so if they are to decide to get back together or to stay together, they really have to be in love with each other, and they really have to go through something together. At no point does Hildy not understand fundamentally who Walter really is. At no point in the Philadelphia story does Tracy Lord not understand fundamentally who Dexter is. And so, to take Hildy or Tracy from hating these men to remarrying them, it has to be a real journey, which also means that this genre has really good female protagonists, because you cannot half-ass someone who needs to change this much. There's something in a character who knows everything at the start, but who changes what they believe in by the end anyways. That is a real character, not like some Richard Curtis BS where the two main characteristics of the female lead are that she's beautiful and American. Not that that matters, because all Richard Curtis films are really about how English people hate their friends. Second though, this era had one other big advantage. Bringing Up Baby and The Lady Eve and so many others were based on short stories, but His Girl Friday and The Philadelphia Story and many others were based on stage plays. And stage plays, in particular, live and die on their characters and how those characters relate to each other. On stage, you cannot rely on a music cue and a montage to say, look at these two people falling in love. You have to show these two people in a room together for extended periods of time, and these two people being in a room together for extended periods of time has to be interesting in and of itself. It's the exact same principle as when Harry met Sally. Harry and Sally, Tracy and Dexter, and especially Hildy and Walter have so much energy within their own dynamic. They are all drawn to each other, but also have a natural conflict within the relationship itself. That's what makes a good rom-com in my view, and that's why so many of the screwball rom-coms are the best of the genre. I think His Girl Friday is especially interesting in this regard because really it was originally a kind of buddy comedy with two male leads, and then one of the characters was turned into a woman. And so, I think it's really interesting to think of a rom-com as basically being a buddy comedy, but with an added romantic element. And there's one other thing that I should talk about here before I leave His Girl Friday, and that is the relationship between the A story and the B story, and how it may or may not relate to the fact that Hildy Johnson is arguably the first famous case of a gender-swapped role. Now, I wouldn't take any of this too seriously or anything, and I'm definitely not, by any means, the most qualified to talk about this, but I do think it's interesting, so I'll mention it. First of all, there is that old line that all comedies are ended by a marriage, and consistently throughout the story there is a connection between marriage and death. Hildy is asked to come back to work to save Earl's life. Earl is going to die on the same day as Hildy gets married. Earl's escape is Hildy's first conscious move towards her need. Earl's reprieve arrives first as Hildy is in her honeymoon period and when Bruce is in jail. And Earl's final reprieve comes right before Hildy's own reprieve from marriage. Or at least her marriage in Albany. But perhaps most interestingly, Hildy is constantly pivoting between, in her own words, wanting to be treated like a woman and being a newspaperman. And when she talks to Earl at her first unconscious move towards her need, they discuss the idea of production for use. Right before her first conscious move, journalists read her story where she talks about the gallows as the state's production for use plan. And there's this question that Hildy has to answer. What is she for? Does she want to spend her time, in her own words, peeking through keyholes and running after fire engines, or giving her babies cod liver oil and watching their teeth grow? Again, I love the fact that this film doesn't sugarcoat or condemn either option. But a gun doesn't have to be fired. A gallows doesn't have to be used, and a woman doesn't have to have babies and become a homemaker in Albany. And what still makes His Girl Friday feel so fresh over 80 years later is that the film does not shy away either from Hildy's conflicting desires or from Hildy's eventual decision. She has a genuine interest in being treated like a woman and having a home, and Walter has not changed. He's not blinded like Rochester or chastened in just about any way like most male leads are in a rom-com. He tells her in their final scene exactly what he cannot provide. The newspaper game is shown for all its highs and lows, and just as he did in sequence 1, Walter doesn't take his hat off for a lady, and he does not wait for her as he walks out the door. And it remains Hildy's choice, and Hildy chooses a career and a life with Walter anyways. It's so refreshing because it takes guts for a story to do that. And guts is something that Hildy Johnson has in spades. This has been Mark Overanalyzes Film. Next time I will be looking at, well, probably the greatest film of all time. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, rate, follow, recommend, and whatever else it is that's good for this kind of thing. A special thanks to Mary Kate O'Flanagan, who taught me everything I know about film, including these methods. Thanks for listening, take care of yourselves, and see you soon.